So it is neither morning nor afternoon nor evening in this part of the world, which is India. This 3:32 p.m. and it's one of those times when it's very difficult to classify. And we are here to throw the spotlight on Indran Amritnayagam's wonderful book, Coconuts on Mars. And I would call it a mix of serendipity and I suppose incidents that I had come across this book quite recently, and I was struck by the kind of writing that this person does. You know, the angst that comes through at the same time that that wonderful, let's say, tangerine touch of humor, and it's not exactly fatalistic kind of writing. It's the writing of a person who looks at life and shrugs and says, "Oh well, what the hell," to quote Joseph Heller. So that's the kind of person who came across in Amrit Nayagam's work. And when that happened, I thought I should invite this individual to appear at Anantha. That is this festival that is being organized by Samyukta Poetry, and where this particular session is a part of. But then I held off. But then, due to a very circuitous route, finally, Indran Amatnayagam is here at Anantha in the edition of the festival that I wished. And that made me wish that I had asked for $1 million. But I don't think such wishes come true. This is good enough. So thank you, Indran, for accepting our invitation and for bringing in such a wonderful group of people as well. And coming to the people, I'm very, very happy because people who are going to be speaking about Indran's book today are Ashwini Kumar, respected scholar, an individual whose commitment to his work also reflects in his approach to poetry as well as his approach to other human beings. The minute I asked him, "Sir, could you please," without a moment's hesitation, he said, "I will be there." And I said, "I'm so grateful." And he said, "Oh, come on. May I say what you said, sir? Is that okay?"
Please go.
He said, "I'm an ant poet. That's all I am." That's how insignificant I am. And then I said, "No, you're not an ant poet. You are an import ant poet."
No, but let me clarify, and make a spotlight on it. I used
Yeah,
in a
one
very
second.
Heideggerian sense, the dwelling of the ant, the dwelling of the ant in a Heideggerian sense.
Absolutely.
Insignificance is so important to us as a poet.
Right.
One should be
Thank you,
aware
sir.
that of that, because normally people have egos bigger than their homes. Yeah. And also we have joining us Mr. Abhimanyu Kumar, eminent journalist, but I would like to think of him as one of those rock star kind of guys, who are also, I mean, he's anyway part of a band called Soul Gypsies. I happened to read an interview of his where he's totally, advising people to just chill. So I like that kind of attitude, and I think that he is one of the right fits for this book. And of course,
I must protest at the use of the word eminent.
Don't protest, you're a gypsy soul, intoxicating.
It's fine.
Intoxicating, we need gypsy. We need gypsies.
Yeah, that works. Thank you.
Absolutely. And yes, we have with us Ashwin Vijay, young poet, a very, very vibrant individual. He is also one of the creative directors of this festival, someone who's had an in-depth knowledge of poetry, who went to Ireland to read poetry, and he read it very well. That's what I'm given to understand from the way he writes. And we should congratulate him because he's fresh off being awarded the Toto Award. So Toto Award for Creative Writing in just 2022, few months ago. So congratulations, Ashwin. I could not have asked for more. And when you think about it, this panel is not at all random. It has been put together with a great deal of thought. All of you are here for a very specific reason, and it is not just to celebrate Indran Amtnayagam's book. It is also to discuss some very important questions of homed, unhomed selves. It's also to discuss the question of who the migrant is. And at one point or the other in your life, either you have been that, or you have written about them, or you have studied them, or you have imbibed those very essential spirit, that comes off this eternal traveling, or the absence of being able to settle down. And so I felt at an organic level that somewhere you would all be able to identify with the kind of poetry that Amrit Nayagan has put across in Coconuts on Mars, because the very idea of coconuts on Mars, has to bring about certain evocations, a sense of incredulity, at the same time, a possible sense of shrugging your shoulders and saying, well, why not? Which is what Indran Amrit Nayagan seems to do most of the time. So that's why I said this time that we have chosen for holding this session, which is neither evening nor afternoon, is ideal, because after all, who is a migrant? That answers our question. So I'm going to take us over to Indran and ask him to talk to us about this book, how it came about, and what he is trying to put across in it.
Well, I'm first of all very grateful for this lovely invitation. Thank you so much to Sonia and to the festival, and to all of these friends and new friends who've gathered to talk about my poems. So I too would like to present myself as an ant in a centaur's world, you know. But I'm a poet fundamentally. I'm also a diplomat, and I've also been a traveler, and I've traveled all my life. Not always of my own volition. As a boy, an 8-year-old boy, I left my homeland in Ceylon then for London. My parents, accompanying my parents and my siblings, and then after 6 years in London, another journey to another island. If you think of England as an island, and you think of Ceylon as an island, this time I went to the Hawaiian Islands, to the island of Oahu as a 14-year-old, where I began to write poetry. And so the journey is sort of in part of my life experience, and it's sometimes a rather jarring, moving from one world to a very different world, and learning to accommodate. And poetry has been the way I've accommodated. I've come to terms with that jarring experience, that shock of the new, and the sudden loss of the old. And that loss has to do with language, Tamil and Sinhalese, other languages that I spoke as a child that I no longer speak. And so that's, and then coconuts on Mars, the notion that a coconut traveled the seas and has peopled continents from Africa, countries from Africa, the African continent to Asia, and has got to England as well, to Cornwall, and you'll see the palm trees, not coconut, not the king coconut, as I say in one of the poems, the lead-off poem, but some relation. So there it gives me a chance to think about relations, human relations, that we're all part of one family. And then the idea of bringing coconuts to Mars, I mean to the new frontier, to the beyond, the back of beyond, you know. And then my son Anandan, who did the cover of this book, made a beautiful image of this figure, this astronaut-like figure playing with a football or a ball by a coconut tree in some surreal landscape that could be Mars, and so that's the notion of the journey moving beyond this planet, and then that raises the core question of extinction. Why are we trying to go to Mars and beyond? Why do we need to do that? And so the ecological theme, the catastrophe that the Earth is living through, Now, this was a book that was published and written before the pandemic, but I think there are indications of the catastrophe already when there were on the planet before the pandemic, and they've just deepened. So I'll stop there, but I mean, this is just some initial remarks and thoughts about where this book came from. One more thing I do want to mention, though, that it's a book that's very important for me because it's been published in India. And, as I'm a Ceylonese, I stress that word. It's a country that no longer exists, Ceylon. It's a country where I lived a fairly happy life and where the different peoples on the island seem to exist or coexisted in relative harmony, at least for those years that I knew as a child. Perhaps I didn't realize what the dark energies that were coursing underneath and around me. But and I certainly didn't realize that my father had been escaped the attacks of 1958, and if he had not done so, if he had not been sort of liberated by his colleagues, I would not be here to say these poems because he would not be here. So, in that sense, there's always a history within a history. But very important for me that the book has been published in India and is available in India. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Indran. I would like to go to Professor Ashwani Kumar and ask him his thoughts on what Indran just said and on the book in general.
Thank you. And I guess, we all know Indran. And currently, given the body of works that Indran has produced over 3 decades, more than 3 decades, Indran. Am I right, Indran? Because
Yes,
Indran's
yes.
journey has been from island to island. And it is not incidental. The book published by our dear friend Hemant Divite is also from 7 islands. Am I right, Indran? Definitely that you have, island to island, and also your linguistic journey coming back to your subcontinent. You remind us in the very dedication in the very beginning of the book, Coconut and Mars, that coming back to the subcontinent and the country that has disappeared. But the memory of this country, country is still on. I still remember those who are Mumbaikars. You remember that Amin Sayani's lilting voice, enchanting voice of Radio Ceylon, the Bollywood songs. So Ceylon is still with us, in memory. I mean, like perhaps in the post-pandemic, speaking to millennial generation, they won't remember, what it means to be belonging and also longing for Ceylon. So, I'm very delighted to welcome you and read through your work, which is very interesting for, I'm not a usual, Mumbaikar, in the sense that I'm a migrant myself, and I have multiple identities like you. But in your case, in my case, sometimes forced and harsh migration that I have gone through both in my political and my poetic life, academic life, and also unsettling. So I find a some kind of a common elements between Indran's works and our works. Speaking to each other. So thank you very much here and sharing your works with us. And on more substantive issue, I'm sure that my colleagues are familiar with his works, including your translations. Translation, because I run a collective, Sonia Notes is called Indian Novels Collective, popularizing, translation across languages in India. So, I can imagine, the kind of, the translation world you come. I mean, like, the whole, in post-colonial literature, the translatability or untranslatability, I can see that there are absences in your poems. I'm going to talk about your poem, one by one, perhaps if I have time, like a typically professor, not like a poet, but, don't laugh at me because the ant is finally smiling and coming back to talk to you. Indran, what I liked about you, because, I know too, I'm very, very familiar and enchanted by the works of Derek Walcott. And I saw Walcott, and then, like, I was surprised and little unsurprised that, you referred to, Kalapka, Don Morris, T.S. Eliot, those influences on you, on your poetics. And at the same time, in the backdrop, I can see Walcott, and is speaking to your Saheli origin, your memories of Jaffna, your memories of, what has, Sri Lanka gone through in the recent past. If you allow me to say that, I'm not going to speak about the technical part of your, today, technical part of your poetry and the poetics, the kind of, work you have done in terms of your control of, linguistic control and building large canvases. I'm sure that some other opportunity will come up where we will talk in detail about the large canvases that you have painted through your words. But then must I tell you, I mean, like in something was very striking. I'm sure that I'm going to share with my friends and colleagues here. What you call mitochondria, generating energy in your syntax and cadence, in your poem, particularly a small word, it brews and blows. And what is significant to me, I mean, like in addition to usual suspects in post-colonial literature, hybridity, mimicry, difference, ambivalence, what I found very interesting in your poems, all kinds of poems, including, Cafe Ginsberg, I mean, Indran. I'm sure that the next time when I come to America, you will take me there, right? So there is a refusal in terms of acknowledging this embodied poetics, and therefore you often invite, especially in this book, us to imagine alterity, the structure, the philosophical, anthropological structure of otherness. So when I read your poem, The New Migrant, recently I published a fat book on, migrants' mobility. So my migrants are the poor migrants walking back on foot, during the pandemic. And I was thinking about how, and I would like to know more from you and through your poems here, and I'm sure that you will read those poems, including The New Migrant, and where I find a sense of Walter Benjamin, when Walter Benjamin uses broken vessel, you have lived in multiple parts of the world, you speak multiple languages, you translate languages. So I would like to know more from you. How do you fit into what Benjamin, Walter Benjamin calls broken vessel, I mean, like on a lighter note. And, one poem which was very striking for me was Going Home. All last, 30 years, I'm trying to come home. I'm trying to come home. I'm going to go to my native place, but that's not happening, I'm not going to go back, I'm told. I can't return to my languages, So something, I'm going to ask you, maybe you will respond to, are you returning to Jaffna in your, on a lighter note? Because in the domestic and foreign affairs poem, you say, my mother wishes to travel to Honolulu, to London, to Colombo. So your country again abroad, do not forget the domestic issue, the mother. And also, I think that you are not going to retire soon, Indran. And you say that I have retired from the field of love. You're already here, and we're expecting more works from you. And let me conclude this part of my, reflection on you. Indran, I love this poem, A Trunk Call. I was remembering, as a child, my father picking up, trunk call and a trunk call to Colombo. I stop here because I find that, certainly you will come and talk more about marriage of continents. The very presence of Indran here refers to marriage of continents. And I'm reminded, just correct me, this is the work that you're referring, the guy Amrita Nagam. I'm sure that you will speak more about, and maybe you will also talk about your own fascination with Ceylonese elephant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I
Yeah,
hope
we
it's
would
okay.
also.
I mean, like, I don't want to, the ant and the elephant, I wanted to make clear to you that, you are not an ant, you're an elephant. You're very
Okay.
dedicated. And, and something I would ask you to, explore through your poems and read that poem, because I'm told that, the elephant, in Sri Lanka, or Ceylon, is largest and perhaps the darkest and with deep pigmentation, So did you go through, in your poetics, some kind of deep pigmentation? I mean, just leave it here.
Depigmentation, you said? Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
deep pigmentation,
As in taking off the color and becoming some kind of,
Yeah,
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 interesting, interesting. That's a dangerous path to explore that road, but I'll be happy to discuss it in terms of, um, There's so many things you've just mentioned. I'm not sure what the best way would be to. Do you want me to? Would you like me to read some of the poems, perhaps that Ashwani just mentioned, and then?
Yes,
I
yes,
would
we
like,
will
I
do
mean, like
that.
Sonia, this is
Yeah.
the way I guess, the poetry reading and the will happen, and if you can
Okay.
begin with, I guess, the new migrant,
Okay, I'm happy to, and then we can continue our conversation with all the guests and panelists. The New Migrant. I'll read a couple of the poems that were mentioned. The New Migrant first. I've struggled with this pregnancy, not the sex or weight, but its meaning. This immigrant child, what language shall it inherit? Where am I to shuffle off the coil? And why do I shun the sports of winter? Is it only because I was born in summer on the islands? What happened to universal empathy, suffrage, the Jamaican bobsledder hurtling down the mountain to gold? I had better turn on television right away, catch what remains of the games. Life does not offer a replay. Get on the ship and sail on the heaving sea, through treacherous rocks, land in the harbor, or perish. The metaphor seems stale. What do I know of ships grown up on aeroplanes? Storm surges, inclement eddies, the search for correspondences, aerial lighthouses. I will find language to translate myself across centuries, to say to the new child, you are mine, and blessed carrier of 6 million years of human history. You are not alone, and stronger yet for this burden embedded in genes, to be discovered in your play, whether you choose sled or cricket bat, biro or electronic pencil, or none at all. A choice instead we have not yet imagined for the virtual reality headset. Um, yeah, there's a lot embedded in this poem, including the choice not at all, right, for the virtual reality headset. The burden embedded in genes, for example, or the notion of finding language to translate myself across centuries. So reading this poem now, I'm seeing in it little sort of images of that apply to many of the poems that I write and have written, and to the search, finding the language. What is the language that can reconstruct the Tower of Babel? What is the choice that can be find you bliss and a permanent state of it, and why one sport as opposed to another. There's a lot here. I'll read a couple more. Ramanujan, because you mentioned, and Ramanujan, of course, is important to all of us, and his translations are vital to all of us. At least for me, I would not be the poet I am without having read his translations of the interior landscape. On an answering machine, he left a comment destined for the back cover of my first book. He died months later, prone in a Chicago hospital, his body victim of a powerful anesthetic. He left us speaking of Shiva poems of love and war, and that first life changer for me and a generation of young Tamils nursing ourselves into our majority, the interior landscape. He told me once he was most proud of the translations, but after his death, the anthologists are filling their books with his own poems. He worked hard, and the treasure he dug up for readers cannot be removed by fiat or accident or the diseases of aging. I miss turmeric and pepper every morning with my mother and read again of the red earth and the pouring rain, mingled beyond parting. And I'll just read that poem, A Trunk Call, and then
That's fantastic poem, please.
Okay. A Trunk Call, Colombo. Excuse me. We learned to say trunk calls, long-distance minutes with the lost boy or uncle in England, muffled, sharing bed and hot water bottle with a girl from Southampton or Leeds or London, the mystical man, solitary occupant of a flat venturing into local pub and company. When I think of Colombo, I remember family who left Tumby, poet and publisher with a piss pot of gold, naming Fitzrovia, that artist retreat in Chelsea, London, landmark in my memory of the city. English wagged and lobbed, Highland Scotch drunk, poetry learned from the English tradition. My dad, who wrote The Marriage of Continents, told me when we left the island that if the English bigot calls me a wog, not to worry. He means I'm a Western Oriental gentleman. Not the case back home, where the Tamil kept quiet on his guard, aware of the minority's precarious fortune, perceived to have money or luck or discipline or success in school and business. That latent disquiet is also Colombo, named after the explorer whose mistaken discovery of India occurred in the island where I write about that lost city, as far away as a trunk call, a telegram. McCarthy Nursing Home, 1960. A baby, composing now from memory. Colombo, a dream, a metaphor, a city by the sea, white-porched, white-walled, white coats and tails, tropical evening dress, the Grand Orient Hotel, father in a cream suit, mother in long white silk, a wedding, a child before expulsion from paradise. So yeah, the expulsion from paradise is a very important sort of theme also in my poems, I think, and then the notion of I was writing that just that one reference in the island where I write. I wrote that poem on Hispaniola, which is where you find Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and that was the original the point where Columbus landed and said he had thought he had discovered India, but it was actually in America that he had come across. Sonia, thank you.
Sonia, can I come for just 10 seconds?
Sure, of course, please.
I didn't know that Indran is a self-certified cook. He says that this is not about cooking. Will you read this omelette poem? The omelette poem. This is not about cooking, Indran.
Oh yes. Should I do that now?
You bring to all kinds of onions there. We love we didn't know
Okay.
many times of sweet onions, hot onions.
Yeah, food is also very much a part of the book. I discovered early in my writing that food is an important element to use. It wins readers and it breaks down barriers between. No, I'm just joking. But yes, metaphors of food are important to me. This is not about cooking, though. I want to unmake order, reassemble portions of onions, garlic, pepper, and cheese separated last night into identical white balls. I will make an omelette. I am a self-certified cook on active duty, but even if retired or an ingenue, this will be my effort, my omelette. You do not have to eat it, certainly, but the smell will smother the nose, your Hobson's choice. My pepper is strong, Scotch, habanero, Douglas, onion sweet and savory, organic, bulbous. I add shallots and scallions too. I want all bulbs in the pan, garnished with turmeric, cardamom, fenugreek, mustard seed, and doused in red wine vinegar. Now would you like a drink, a poem? Shall we set up a calendar, days of abandon, days of 4 white balls? I fear I give too much away. Sleuths will reject this verse, onions stirred for the maker alone. It's my great fear that the onions are being stirred just for me. Thank you. You're on mute, I think, Sonia.
I was saying it's a lovely poem. Is there anybody from the audience who would like to comment on it or add to it or share an experience of such levels of omelette making? Ashwin, how did you make omelettes in Ireland?
So this is a poem that I myself love very much. This is something that I wanted to read myself if there was an opportunity. Now that Indran has read, I really like the way he is reading these poems, and I'm really thoroughly enjoying it. This poem, to me, the poem itself presents a Hobson's choice, that art itself as a Hobson's choice, that you feel like you have a choice in creating, that you can choose to create or not to. But here we are confronted with the fact that we have to, we are, as artists, we have uh, to create art, and that is a necessity. And uh, cooking is one of the ways. I am someone who personally enjoys cooking, and omelette is one of, eggs are so versatile. Eggs are one of the things that you can manipulate in so many ways and create something very flavorful from something seemingly so bland. And I quite enjoy the image, and thoroughly engaging personal tone to this particular poem. I'm quite happy to hear you read this one.
Thank you.
And perhaps you could share with us your impressions of Indran's poetry.
Okay, so it's an honor to be here actually discussing the work of a poet who has been publishing poetry for as long as I have been alive. So, in languages that I have no comprehension of, and plus this one that I'm just beginning to learn how to unlock. And he brings a plethora of experiences that span continents and many linguistic and cultural lives. And the title of the collection reflects that, in my opinion. To be honest, the name of the collection doesn't strike me as strange or incredulous. I'm a Malayali, a Keralite, and the saying goes, when there are tours to Mars, you will find that a Malayali has already set up shop there, selling tea and savories to the visitors. So, and coconut is such an essential part of our cuisine, and it is so near and dear to us. But jokes apart, I'm very, very grateful for this sort of a cultural bridge into these poems. And I feel a sense of kinship to the longings of a migratory soul that is reflected here. My experiences are far more limited, but the sense of nostalgia, not mournful, but very certain, and the sense of an elsewhere self reflected in these poems feel familiar to me. The in-betweenness of the new migrant that Indran captures in these poems manages to be simultaneously personal and universal. The poem Coconut on Mars offers us the vision of the poet. Let us not build any frontiers, as there are no strangers. Envisions a world united, all cousins, a relation. The poems are marked equally by religious inheritances. The poet knows the loaves and fish and parting of waters, waking up of Lazarus, and by literary inheritances, from Ramanujan to Valk. And I just like to read one poem from the collection. I would have read, this is not about cooking as well, but since it has just been read and discussed, I read so beautifully. I would like to read By All Means a Whale, which discusses the idea of migration, of chance, of belief, and of literature, everything coinciding together in one very short, beautiful poem. By All Means a Whale. The humpback whale has swum from beyond Cape Cod to frolic with her pup in the warm, cool waters of Samana. The migratory reach of birds, fish, and mammals is the subject of a million doctoral theses, but no one has yet to explain pure chance, coincidence, why I happened to see this particular mother and child on Saturday morning. The fact that I bought an excursion on a whale watching tour, that I was guaranteed a whale, or another tour free of charge are mere helpers of fate. The boat could have sprung a leak, the car taking me to port run out of gas. My imagination might have surprised me, moving from observed reality to dream and fantasy. I did put Moby Dick in my bag just in case. Thank you, Indra.
Thank you so much. It's such a wonder to hear the poem read by you, and then to hear and to see the jokes in it, and there's and to remember the creation of the poem. And by the way, Samana is a place on Hispaniola in the Dominican Republic, from where these whale watching tours are arranged, and you can go out and you're guaranteed a whale, as the poem says, by some tours. and I did see a whale and that on that trip. And now, of course, in the island of Sri Lanka, there are whale watching tours as well, and in other places in the world. But this is but this notion of the island, wherever you are, the island is the island. It's the island. It's the island you carry inside of you, and the island that you're living in. And no man is an island, so the notion that we're all connected. So that goes back to literary history. I mean, the poem of John Donne. Um, so you are a collection of what you've read and what you think about and what you conceive or conceive. It's a new creation, and yet it's an old idea coming in with the new at the same time. So there's no possible. The idea of making it new, which is a very big idea in poetry, is it's a bit like the Auden saying, "Poetry makes nothing happen." I mean, in a sense, there is no new. Even though I write about the new migrant, and I'm obsessed by the notion of making it new. At the moment, I'm writing, for example, a series of, I call them, free sonnets or something. Basically, I mean, the 14-line format, but I'm not following the Petrarchan or the Shakespearean model. And yet, I feel compelled to fit my poems into these 14 lines. So that's a project I'm working on at the moment. In this book, I felt compelled, I think, to write as tightly as I could, a very intimate book, very private. Yes, I delve into the well of my own experience to write, and sometimes, and into the well of what I read. I mean, I'm sort of, but I hope to think that the poems speak not just for myself, but that speak to any reader, and the human exploration of meaning and understanding of himself, herself in this planet that is where so much is disappearing. I mean, that's always also a part of the wonder of seeing the whale. So how many more are there to be seen and by whom? Anyway, thank you so much for the beautiful remarks, Ashwin, and very grateful to you and to.
Incidentally, the whale poem was something that had, resonated with me as well. I think I had mentioned it to you in a correspondence. So before I come to what I want you to read, I'd like to take us to Abhimanyu. Abhimanyu, tell us about what you thought of the book and what stuck. Mike, yeah.
Lovely to hear you all and very insightful. Glad to be part of this. I have known Indran for quite a
Could
while
you be
now.
louder, Abhimanyu? You're not coming through, actually.
Hello, is this loud
Perhaps you
enough?
should, no, maybe you should get rid of the headphones. Maybe that will help.
Okay, wait, just a sec.
Any better?
Much
Yes,
better, much better.
yeah.
Okay. So, although I've never had the pleasure of meeting Indran, I have known him for quite a long time, and I must add that he also very generously and graciously wrote the foreword for my own book of poems, so for which, of course, I'm grateful. And I've had the chance to read his poetry for a long time, several of the books, and before coming on to this book, I just wanted to mention that what he was saying about his father being saved by a mob, for example, that is from another collection. I think there is a poem about that in another collection. I remember the poem very well, distinctly, reading it. I don't remember exactly the words. So, but that is a touching poem. Indran knows I've written about it as well for a review. And especially there's another poem on the same lines, which has always remained in my memory, which starts with, "What is a poem to a man who is basically about to die?" That's what you described. That's another poem, though. I think the father poem is different. So just to note that, and there you also talk of the other, and here also you're talking of the other, and in one poem you mentioned that who is the other, basically, like we we are all the same in that sense, and that we cannot all walk into the party. Another poem you say, like, there's just not enough food for the guests and things like that. And so these are some of the concerns that I do see in your work. There's another poem here where you also again say that the frontiers dissolve, and so the border, because you are moving so much all over the all over the planet, all over the globe, all over the earth, and imbibing. But before that, a little bit about omelets. And so I feel that the best kind of omelet is the Spanish omelet, because it's filling also, and you don't have to have that bread, which I have never really taken to my Indian taste buds. So, but the Spanish omelet I like, because then it's nice to make. And then there's a proverb which comes from there, which of course Indran will know, to dar la vuelta a la tortilla, which is to turn it around. And it has a poetic metaphor already, like, to turn the omelet over, basically, right, Indran? If you are an expert in Spanish. But in the foreword to this book, you say you have left all your languages to sort of germinate in their own say gardens. You used another word, you used different words, but like flowers to germinate in their own garden. So now you have moved more closely to English, I see, and there is actually reminiscences of England, and quite a fair bit. And you are moving closer to that way, I mean, howsoever to describe, but sort of maybe what to you is the root your father wrote in English, I think.
Yes.
And so that is there, and there's one note I made. I'll just quickly check again. And there's one more thing, yeah. So I'll come to that later, but I just wanted to take it on right away, because you said this thing about, sorry, there's a lot of noise in my house with children are playing, and in another context you have mentioned, I think when we were at the Prakriti Foundation reading also, you had said that this Auden line that you keep coming back to, and we keep coming to it, is that poetry makes nothing happen. I often think of it. It has never left me. And I must say that I do not agree after all. Poetry makes things happen, but in a subtle way. And of course, not in the way you would have liked. You means anybody would have liked it too, but it does make things happen. I mean, and sometimes you have to pay a little bit of a price for it also.
Right. That's right.
I never had to pay any, but actually writers do, and they go to jail and things like that. And so I don't know what kind of mood he was when Auden he wrote that, or maybe, or maybe that's his philosophy, and maybe the modernist idiom where nothing really happens in stories and things like that. Anyway, so leaving that aside, I do think that this is a book about survival, which you mentioned in the intro as well, if I may say, although I don't know what you're saying. You're saying, is it like, but I do see that if you're saying you have reached, like, of course, of your diplomatic career, you mention it quite clearly that you wish to retire in a poem, and that is there. I don't think that the poetry is ending, because the last poem suggests that you have plenty of things to do, and the angel can wait, and etc., etc. You have your will to revise. That's how the book ends with. Some other time you tell the angel. So I see it as a book of survival, and but in particular, what caught my eye was, and there are references to nature and your abiding themes, and you write about other poets, Ramanujam, Walcott, and but there's a suite of poems starting from when you write 3 poems to your mother. It's a suite of 3 poems you write for your mother. No, it's fine. Let her come. That's my daughter. She just wants to be with me. Anyway, so you write 3 poems for your mother, and then you move on. You write a poem for Blue, which I take to be a pet.
Yes, that's right.
And you write a poem about your brother, and you mention your father, so a lot of and children and everything. And then for me, that suite ends at the poem Cafe Ginsberg. And again, that's the third poet you mentioned, who features in almost every book of yours. And you were close to him, and so I just want to hear about this, like, now the poems have become very intimate and about your family, and, and so would you just like to speak about that? Because for me, that suite of poems is kind of the heart.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great that you make references to some of the other books as well, and I know you've been reading a number of my poems for some time, and yes, the family is very much there, and the people very close to me in this book. I don't know. In that sense, I feel it's a very intimate book, a private yet public book at the same time. I mean, in the sense that everyone is an individual and in a family, and so we can relate to this. Any reader can relate to these concerns. And my mother remains an important element. I mean, in my current book, 10,000 Steps Against the Tyrant, which I just published here, she is a figure. She is going to vote, for example, in the last U.S. federal election, and it may be the last time she has a chance to put her views forward against the tyranny that was threatened or was being in this country, and so and then. But then in the same book there is it's a book written during the pandemic, so there's a series called I'm just talking about the new book, The Mother of Elections and The Mother of Pandemics, are two parts of the book. And then there's the real mother, you see, and that real mother is the saving grace in a sense of, and the hope and her determination to survive. And you mentioned survival and her a sort of quiet relationship to existence and to God, and I am very inspired by that. I mean, it's fallen to me to be the principal sort of caregiver for my mother at this time in my family. So it's just and with help, of course. I can't say I'm doing this by myself, but it's. And she becomes, in a sense, the principal caregiver of my poems as well. I mean, she shows up as a metaphor in my writing and in this book. I mean, I wrote this book also after I had returned from abroad. I mean, I have traveled a lot, and as a diplomat, I've worked in different places, different countries. The most recent in Haiti, and I came back from Haiti in 2017. And I came back to writing this book, and some of the poems I'd already written, but I kept writing them. And the book was eventually published, I think, in 2019. And now we are in 2022, so it's the longest I think I've stayed in any. No, it's not the longest I've stayed in any one country or one place at one time, but it will get there once in a few years. So I'm sort of settled in a sense, and looking back at the journey. But I'm going ahead as individually. I mean, I've become a publisher now with my partner in this business, Sarah Marin. We're doing a press called Beltway Edition. So, and our first book, which I will show you, it's this one. Our ancestors did not breathe this air, and it's an anthology of poems by 6 Muslim women poets, all who studied together at MIT.
Very interesting, and congratulations.
Thank you. But the title is very dramatic. Our ancestors did not breathe this air. It's again a book about migration. So I certainly, as a publisher and then as an editor of Beltway Poetry Quarterly, I'm working with other poets, trying to create an online journal that reflects what's going on in the world, throughout the world. So we're publishing poems from all over, and hopefully they're of interest to readers. So it's not only the poetry writing, but it's also the other activities, the editing, the teaching. I've been teaching courses on Pablo Neruda, on Borges, and we'll be teaching a course on Fernando Pessoa. Fernando Pessoa is an interesting choice because he was a poet who invented many heteronyms, he called them, many of them, hundreds of them, and there were 4 in principle. So I, as a poet, I write my poems in English, and I agree with you, Abhimanyu, I've become more into English now. I keep my French and Spanish alive by writing every week a poem in each language. And I have a place to publish them, a newspaper in Haiti and a newspaper in the Dominican Republic. They're online journals principally. So that's a discipline, and I am thrilled to have that opportunity. because I'm very close to that island of Haiti and the Dominican Republic, Hispaniola. I found in it a kind of home that reminded me of the original home and so on. Even though I'm now here in the mainland of the United States in Rockville, Maryland, I mean the home is what you make with your words in a sense. So there's a lot. But if someone invites me to go on a spaceship to Mars as the first poet invited by one of these billionaires, I won't say no, because I'm also part of it. I'm not a committed leftist in a sense, but I believe that one has to fight for and support the freedom and the freedom. And we are also, I must note, in Sri Lanka today there is a huge crisis, of where people are suffering very deeply and very.
As a journalist, I can't resist asking you, if I may ask one more, that what do you think of the Sri
Sure.
Lankan?
Well, I mean, I read a poem written anonymously that was published on Ground Views, which was called, "Gotta go," right? I mean, it's the more. I read it because, and I mean, after all, the economy is suffering from its own mismanagement, and it's also from outside forces that country cannot control. But there is a a possibility here of so many people from all ethnic groups and professions uniting, coming together, and there's a chance, just like with the Arab Spring, just like with other such moments in other parts of the world, for a real salvation in a sense from all of these years of mismanagement. So that's the hope, and I subscribe to the hope, and I will support that hope.
One last thing for this talk with you is that one thing I want to ask you about the book. There's a poem in which you mention an old lady and you say, why confront the lady? And is there a story behind it? It goes on then to, I just had it out.
I'm sorry, an old lady who shouts abuse at me. Is that the one?
No. I'll just take it out quickly if you give me a second.
Sure. And
and the Cafe Ginsberg poem, of course, it's a beautiful dream.
Yes, it is a dream. I mean, sitting on the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City on the cafe on the top. Allen Ginsberg, and you're right, Allen Ginsberg does show up a lot in almost every book. I mean, he's actually in the new book as well. I come to think of it, there's a reference, there's a poem. He was an important figure, like a father figure in a sense. My father's friend, and my father introduced me to him when I was a teenager, and that was very, very important, that meeting for me. And it was also a time when I had a chance to meet Nissim Ezekiel, and I believe I met Ramanujan briefly then as well. They were all people who were known, my father had invited and he knew to conferences and colloquium in the East-West Center in Hawaii. And as a teenager, I had a chance to attend some of these sessions. I played hooky from school and went instead to listen to these poets and writers. And I'm very, very grateful.
I found that poem. Sorry, it says, I'll just read it. It's very short, two stanzas. Let us dress an old wound. Why confront the lady? She is old now and probably regrets her youthful demons. But can the torturer feel remorse, be contrite, apologize? Is that what she needs to say and do? Before I leave the poetry of exorcism to some young scribe who cannot master the inchoate swirl of rawhide until he finds the right verb and the end rhyme. I found this the most intriguing poem out of most poems.
Yeah, it's touching on a theme that's a very dark theme from early in my experience growing up. It's the same theme that in my first book, The Elephants of Reckoning, I wrote a poem for my autistic brother Chutta, um, uh, and and there's a figure in that poem, uh, who is very powerful, very domineering, and cruel, and was cruel to my brother and cruel to me probably, and then here there's a sense of at what that same powerful young woman who was so uh, towering over our childhood, and for a brief period when she worked for us and with us and tortured us, has since. What would it be like to see her again, or to confront her over those old sorrows and inflictions that she was in which she was engaged, or not? And I think that's what I'm talking about here. I mean, that's the biographical origin of that. But sometimes you want to write a poem, and you sort of hide the actual biography, but you write it in such a way that it's a touchstone for someone, any reader's sort of reflections about their own growing up and their own experiences and their own, the notion of having to confront the past, which is a very big theme, right, for anyone. Confront and master it, or address it, and overcome its lingering sort of control over your mood and your happiness. And I think that's all of that is in this poem, this brief poem. So
letting us know.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Indran, because I was just reflecting on what you were saying, and I realized that it's all about the lived experience, and it's about writing down that pain and those day-to-day affairs that then leave such a huge mark on the mind. I mean, where we come from, and when you're comfortably ensconced, you sometimes don't think about certain aspects of life which are precarious for other people, while it's just taken for granted as far as you're concerned. Which brings me to the poem that I physically identify with you the most, which is The Vanishing Hat. For reasons obvious, and why that reason is obvious, would you please read that for us, please?
With pleasure. And as all can see, my hat is on my head.
Yes.
The vanishing hat. Let me find that.
That's on page 38.
38, yes. The man with the black hat disappeared 6 months back, crossed the border into the Dominican, grew a beard, white and black, returned afterwards to his digs in Mont Calvaire, but did not advise his friends, who assumed he had left to attend to some heart business, and he would be in touch. But days, then weeks dragged into months, before the notice appeared in the cultural calendar of the talk where the man would reveal the nexus between poetry and diplomacy, the meeting point, the reason the heart developed calcium deposits, why Tamils left Sri Lanka with just a change of clothes, and 100,000 other questions pertaining to movement of peoples, goods, dreams, and the hat that covered the head of this poem before going cold underground. Yeah, it's a rather alarming poem, isn't it? I am very so glad that you mentioned it, because I'd written it and I'd sort of put it aside. I hadn't thought about it for a long time. But it's a good poem to sort of focus on these things. The hat is, in the Haitian culture, the country without a hat is death. It's le pays sans chapeau, the country without a hat. So you keep your hat on as you keep alive, you survive, as mentioned in the book of survival. Now, I don't sleep with my hat on. I mean, Okay, it's picked up.
Yeah, sorry, I had a bit of a power failure here. That's why. Please go
No,
on.
no problem. And so I had this different hats, and I forgot my hat at the time, uh, and so I was on the plane. I was on my way to the airport, and I didn't have the hat. And I wrote frantically to my friend, and I mentioned that I will be reading without a hat. I had no. And then I get to the reading, and he showed up with this hat, which was a very generous and kind and wonderful gift. And he gave it to me, and I put it on, and it left me. It's gone through many things. It's been lost. I thought I had lost it recently, and so on. So it's a prop. Yes, it's a sort of symbolic crutch, but it's part of the identity of the poet. This poet. And in the Haitian culture, as I mentioned, it's about survival, about living, being still around, still having things to do, as was mentioned at the end of this book, the poem Living Will, uh, not yet ready to meet the Maker, not yet ready to meet the angel. Um, and in this case, the poem mentions so many things that I think are relevant. For example, the reason the heart developed calcium deposits, for example. Why Tamils left Sri Lanka with just a change of clothes. And when I mentioned Monconvert, that's just a neighborhood in Port-au-Prince where I was living. So, yeah, and it's the border, crossing the border. I'm very opposed to borders, and walls built between countries. And so even in the Dominican Republic recently, that country has decided to build a wall over some of its border between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. So I wrote a poem, sort of very angry poem about that wall. I mean, I realize it's a utopian sort of position, but I stand for it, that we have to eliminate borders, physical borders and mental borders and linguistic borders, all borders. And yet, so for me, if Auden said poetry makes nothing happen, for me, my slogan would be, to eliminate the borders, to break the borders down. And I hope this book is a border breaker or a border cruncher of some kind. Border, I mean, it's sort of written across the border lines. I think of do not step across this line, or I think of
Keep off the
Salman
grass.
Rushdie's book, would Keep Off the Grass, or all these things. They're all part of our collective sort of consciousness about literature also crossing borders and bringing people together. The notion that we are one family, which of course one could argue is a naive notion, and yet it is. I mean, naive in the sense that before the realities of war, this war going on, this invasion of Ukraine, for example. I mean, this kind of reality has to be confronted by poetry as well. And my way of doing that is writing. I mean, just writing and sharing words. And in the United States today, we just read about the private opinion that the Roe versus Wade will be overturned, though it's not yet a fait accompli, the Supreme Court. So again, this is the subject that we are writing about today in the United States. I'll stop there.
That's those are very, very potent matters which tell us that this book goes on, and it assumes different shapes to different people who subscribe to it, who are also co-participants in the process that is going on. We're very grateful to you for putting this out there, for letting your story be told, and in the process letting our stories be told as well, because in one sense of the term, all of us are co-participants in this book. And as Ashwin mentioned, finding coconuts on Mars is not at all a strange thing. And it sailed the oceans to come to our shores, and we embraced it. and we cannot live without it. So where we go, the coconut goes.
Yeah, but Surya, the last thing, Indran, it seems
Thank you.
We
he's
just have 1
finding
minute.
king coconut.
King coconut.
King
Yes,
coconut.
absolutely. Yeah, the king coconut. We have embraced it, and where we go, the king coconut goes. So thank you very much. And with that, yes.
Maybe we can have one Indran read his last poem from the book once, because I really feel it's like a manifesto for the whole.
Sure. So we'll end on that note. There will be no more.
I certainly agree with Ashwin, because in the last poem, the living will, is speaking to the future of all of us, the planet. And I find here is a Derridian aporia, the touch of Derrida. I mean, like in the sense that he also speaks of hostility. He also speaks of what in Spanish, correct me, Indra, conviviality, the hospitality. That kind of future he is envisaging. Thank you very much.
So yes, if you could just read that, and we'll end on that note. There will be no more formal goodbyes. We'll do that.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Thank you, Ashwani. Thank you, Ashwin. Thank you, Abhimanyu. Thank you all of listening. Living will. One day I will sit down with my soul and write that I've loved every bird that flew, every monkey on the branch, every elephant charging through the grass. I will say I love you as much as the baby gecko scampering past my foot, the snake rustling under the wood cut and stacked in my yard. I will say I've loved every creature, every song, every turn in the road, and I will be lying with my eyes open and my eyes closed. I am not God. I'm not even the dog loyal to his master, who misses him blind, like his daughter in Lima, which I call at night until the next time we meet in dreams via chat, cheek to cheek, remembering always that in paradise there are no trains or roads or seas or death, no going away, no arriving, doors and garden open, souls who come and go, smiling, and all the angels, all birds, all dolphins, all men and women in song, dancing. And why not reciting the Song of Solomon, the epic poems, the love songs that consoled when we set off on the roads, hopped on trains and aeroplanes, got caught in traffic in our head, said goodbye before saying hello. Did I know you down there? You were the greengrocer I walked past going to school in London. Oh, my dear, how beautiful you are, Pauline, with ripe red hair, who shared the religion prize with me at St. Vincent's on Blandford Street. But you may be alive still, and I'm not ready to meet my Maker, to be plucked from the cycle of rebirth. Not yet. I have poems to compose, children to raise, earth to cultivate. Come back later, Angel. I have my will to revise. Thank you very much.
One last thing I just wanted to say, that Pauline comes in both the first poem of the book and the last poem. So she must really be the love of your life.
And I don't know where she is. No. Thank you so much. Thank you.